Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we're diving into a really common struggle that almost every grad student knows all too well, that massive leap from being a good student to actually becoming a researcher. I mean, why is it that some people seem to just sail across that gap, while so many others get, well, stuck? Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to start with this pretty provocative quote from a 2005 paper, because it just gets right to the heart of the problem. This isn't just some vague feeling people have, it's a known issue in academia. See, even students who are on their way to a PhD can really struggle to connect their own work to the bigger scientific conversation. Sure, they can summarize papers like a champ, but using them to build a powerful, original argument, that's a whole different ballgame. And this leads to that feeling of being stuck. You know, you crushed your classes, you aced all the exams, but now you're staring down your own research project, and you just feel totally adrift. It's like the skills that got you here aren't the skills you need to get there, and that gap can be a really frustrating, kind of lonely place to be.
So how do we even start to make sense of this gap? Well, there's this really fascinating study that gives us a fantastic way to think about it. The authors suggest that becoming a researcher isn't some gradual, steady climb. Nope, it's more like you have to cross a critical threshold.
And that brings us to this idea of a threshold concept. Just think of it like this. It's like seeing in 3D for the very first time. Before you see it, you just don't. But once you do, your entire perspective shifts and you can't go back to seeing the old way. Well, the study argues that for new researchers, there's one specific threshold concept that is an absolute game changer. And here it is. This is the big one. The key isn't just reading a ton of papers, it's the ability to meaningfully apply all that reading to place your own research into the massive, ongoing scientific conversation. You have to get that research isn't done in a bubble, it's about joining a dialogue that's been going on for, decades, sometimes even centuries. Okay, now this is where the study gets really, really cool. The researchers didn't just stop at the theory of a threshold. They actually went looking for it in a group of real, live graduate students. They wanted to figure out what actually separates the people who cross this line from those who get left behind. So they asked the million-dollar question, what are the students who get it doing that's so different? Is it about the classes they take, the number of hours they put in, or is it something else entirely? To find out, they came up with a really clever study design. So here's how they did it. They got 14 new grad students and had them all submit a research proposal. These proposals were graded specifically on how well they used the existing literature. Then a whole academic year goes by. The students do their thing, classes, lab work, meetings, but they get zero feedback from the researchers. At the end of the year, they resubmit their proposals, and that's when they got sorted into two very different groups. And the results were, wow, just really striking. Exactly half the students, 7 of them, were labeled crossers. They had shown huge improvement in how they used literature. The other half, the non-crossers, they showed zero growth. In fact, a few of them actually got worse. The group was split perfectly down the middle, which basically set up this amazing natural experiment. So what was the difference maker? When the researchers started digging through interviews with all the students, the first huge pattern that popped out wasn't about grades or anything like that. It all came down to mentorship and its surprising flip side, isolation. It turned out the non-crossers were stuck in what the study calls intellectual isolation. And here's the really wild part. On the surface, this isolation looked an awful lot like something we're always told to value: independence. I mean, check out this contrast. It is night and day. Every single one of the 7 non-crossers said they had total autonomy and worked pretty much on their own, and they thought this was a good thing. Meanwhile, all 7 of the crossers talked about how much they leaned on their mentor for guidance. They weren't lone wolves. They were in what you could call a cognitive apprenticeship. And just listen to this quote from a non-crosser. You can hear the pride in their voice about being independent. They genuinely believe that struggling and figuring it out alone is what grad school is supposed to be about, that it's building their mental capacity. Now contrast that with a crosser. It's a totally different vibe. This student describes a partnership. They still owned their project. I came up with what I wanted to do, but their mentor was this essential guide, helping them figure out the how. The mentor was basically providing the scaffolding they needed to build something real. But that intellectual isolation, that was only one part of the story. The second thing that separated these two groups was even more fundamental. It wasn't just about how they were working. It was about their basic understanding of what research even is.
The researchers have a name for this, too: conceptual isolation. The non-crossers weren't just isolated from their mentors, they were conceptually cut off from the entire history and purpose of their own field. They didn't see research as a conversation they needed to join, they saw it as a task they needed to complete.
Okay, this next quote is just stunning. A non-crosser, when asked what makes a good researcher, actually compared it to finding a cheap vacation package online. To them, research was just a fancy version of information retrieval, kind of like a glorified Google search. It totally, completely misses the entire point about creating new knowledge. Now, let's hear from a crosser. This student sees their project as a piece of a much larger puzzle. Their work is going to help figure out if a certain process is useful or just a waste of money. They get it. They understand that their small contribution builds on everything that came before it and will inform everything that comes after. This table just lays it all out perfectly. The non-crossers had these huge, lofty goals like fixing the fuel crisis, but they saw their own work as this totally separate, disconnected thing. The crossers, on the other hand, had much more realistic goals: to add new knowledge, to make an incremental contribution. They understood their job was to add one more brick to the Great Wall of science.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, for students, the message is crystal clear. Don't confuse being isolated with being independent. Go seek out guidance. For mentors, it's a huge reminder to provide structure and to not just throw novices into the deep end with full autonomy too soon. And for programs, this stuff has to be baked into actual supervised research, not just stuck in a classroom somewhere. Just doing research by itself is not enough. So that really leaves us with one final question to chew on, and it applies whether you're in grad school or any field where you're trying to master a complex new skill. Are you learning in isolation, or are you actively joining the conversation? The answer to that question might just be what determines whether you cross your own personal threshold or stay stuck. Thanks for tuning in.